Well, welcome to today's webinar titled Staff Performance Management for Fundraisers. Just a couple of overview points as we get started here. There'll be a time for questions at the end. This webinar will run 30 minutes and we'll have a 15-20 minute Q&A. There's several ways you can ask questions. During the webinar, there's a chat panel at the lower right corner of GoToMeeting where you could put comments in. Or you can raise your hand on the right side panel. There's a little hand. If you click that, we can actually unmute you at the Q&A and have you ask your question live. We're also, after the webinar, we'll make the slides available. We'll put the recording of the webinar up as well, and there's some discussion forums where you can continue the discussion, and this slide will come back at the end. So today, I'm Doug Cogswell, the President and CEO of Advisor Solutions. I'll be the moderator. We've done a lot of work as a company in leveraging advancement information for a variety of purposes, and a lot of our work right now is using advancement data to help manage major giving staffs and helping the teams work effectively and efficiently. Tina Donahue, who's a senior analyst from Martin Lundy, has joined us. Hi, Tina.
Hi, Doug.
Welcome. And Jen Schimpf-Bowerman from Wake Forest, she's the AVP of Advancement Services, will be on the phone as well, and she'll be talking about specifically use case scenarios at Wake Forest. Hi, Jen.
Hey, Doug.
So just to get started, as background, the Advisor, we do a lot of work in varying industries, and when we look at fundraising development and compare it with sales management and other consultative sales in other industries, it's really much more of a relationship and not so much measurable results to date in fundraising, and it's been more of an art than a science. And we are trying to bring to the industry some of the metrics and proven processes from other industries that can make fundraising development more effective. And clearly in today's time frame, there's across the board pressure to get more from less. So we would argue there's significant benefits to better tracking, management, and process. And today, we're going to hear some concept from Tina from Martin Lundy and from our work, and then Jen's going to sort of nail it down with some specifics from Wake Forest and how the concepts have been applied to help a major giving team operate more effectively. So there's a few key principles here. One is about managing to metrics, and when done effectively, and there's varying ways of doing this, but the concept is the development officers have operating plans which are maybe set up annually and managed maybe on a quarterly basis. There's comparison to accepted metrics, and you have some software tools maybe that have charts like these that have the staff from left to right, and you have some goal lines of where you're supposed to be. And these are reviewed. These are actually used in meetings with group discussions of best practices. The team works to improve subpar performance. The metrics basically highlight best practices, and they'll highlight some group is doing better than some other group. And it drives a discussion or a coaching session trying to understand what is this group doing that may help them move proposals through so much more rapidly, or to have higher level asks, or to get more proposals closed in a period than some other group. And it's reviewed formally with the development officers at least 2 times a year, in some cases maybe quarterly or even more often if there's challenges in a group. The idea is the metrics are used in review sessions to help highlight best practices and become a coaching tool. And key behind this is having data. Often when we start on a project, a lot of the data isn't there, and contacts may not be entered regularly, and maybe proposals are in, but they're put in twice a year at some de minimis value like $2,500. We've seen that. That needs to be cleaned up, and there's a process, and sort of one of the philosophies is if it's not in the system, it didn't happen. And management does need to be behind this, because without the data, you can't do the top parts. The data needs to be examined, shared across the team. I know there's, especially in this sector, there's been a hesitancy to show data widely, and there's been a hesitancy to engage in some of the tough discussions about performance and this kind of coaching. But the data is only valuable if it's used with the team and helps them to understand what's working well and what's not, so the whole team can come up to a higher level of performance. And of course, it uses a basis for reviews and discussions. So that's the concept. We're going to now transition to some of the key metrics, and I'm going to just spend 30 seconds on this and hand it off to Tina so she can talk a bit more about what Martin Lundy is seeing in some of these areas. But generally, there's some numbers about how many suspects in the pool, how many active in-person visits, proposals, these get into more kind of the dollar value and close ratios. So there's a set of these metrics. We've noted up here. They vary. These are concepts that each school or each type of fundraiser may be a little bit different, but these are the kinds of things we're measuring. And so Tina, could you jump in and kind of add a little more value to that?
Sure. Thanks, Doug. And good afternoon, everyone. Doug, your point is right on the spot. What we're seeing is that these industry benchmarks really vary by sector, and that is in relation to portfolio composition, solicitations, visitations, and meetings. And so when we work with our clients, we use these metrics as a beginning conversation. And these are refined and recalibrated based on a number of factors, including the fundraising maturity and the historical campaign achievement by that organization. And then at the onset, before I go into these specifics, I think it's important to note is that in every staffing model that we create is that we do build in some ramp-up period for new major gift officers. And even if they're seasoned in development, if they're new to the organization, they are new to your prospect pool, and so we recognize that it takes at least 12 to 18 months to begin to develop these relationships with potential donors. And then another factor that we look at when we're building out a model on staffing is the turnover rates over time, and we again, that's part of a conversation that we have with our clients based on their staffing information and their historical turnover rates. Here, what you're seeing is, again, some guidelines that we begin with our clients, and that's really looking at a prospect pool of 400 to 600 suspects, and then, winding that down to 100 to 150 active managed prospects per gift officer, and with about 75 to 120 in-person visits. This does not include contacts, but these are meaningful visits that your gift officer has with the staff, with the prospective donor, and then from there, determining how many active proposals are happening at any one time, and then determining from there, okay, of those active proposals, how many do we expect to close within that year? And so when we're building out a model for staffing, these are, again, some of the guidelines that we look into to determine, what is the ultimate closure rate when you roll up all of your staffing productivity for that organization. A piece of this is you'll see a bullet ask for expected value, and what we do is we look at the prospect pool, their potential capacity, their affiliation attachment to the organization to determine, okay, how much of those dollars could a organization capture from that individual, and how does that look in relation to staffing? Doug and Jen, I don't know if you want to jump in at any point here on any of these points.
I'd say, Tina, yeah, this is great, and this is the kind of numbers we see when we look at higher-end consultative sales in other industries, which is a similar kind of a process to raising large donor gifts. We see similar kinds of numbers, and these are sort of capacity numbers that people can reasonably do, and these are ratios. So yeah, these sort of stand up as you look across industry, and this is something. And Jen, add more value in a minute to what you're doing at Wake, but we see not a lot of fundraisers doing, but we think it's really important, because if you just look at the proposal pool and say, Mark has $10 million in proposals on the street. If he has all of the higher rated prospects, that would be a pool with very high expected value. Maybe he actually should have $30 million out, and somebody else might have $10 million out and have lower rated prospects, and maybe $10 million is really good because that pool is really only worth $3 or $4 million. So this helps you get a feel for, at the prospect level, kind of what the proposal ought to be given the ratings and the attachments, but also helps you when we aggregate this at the development officer level to get a feel, is $10 million good or bad? And we can then create ratios and cross-compare, and it becomes something you can really manage to and help people understand, $10 million, your challenge is you ought to be pushing the ask values up given the high value of your prospects. Or maybe the issue is, you're covering the middle level ratings in your pool, but not the very high rating. So you've got good coverage on the numbers basis from a number of proposals out, but you're actually going to the middle, not the higher, so your actual ratio is low here. You ought to refocus, and maybe we could pull some of the lower rateds away and really get your attention on the higher rateds, which are the key to the campaign. That's the kind of stuff that starts coming out of that.
And I would say from my perspective, not all portfolios are created equal, so this helps equalize the measurements against them, which provides for a better conversation when you're doing a performance conversation or a portfolio review.
Well, and Doug, on the next slide, we'll start talking about for Wake Forest, the exact comment you just made about the expected yield. We looked at that in relation to staffing, and for Wake Forest, they were preparing for their next campaign, and they were looking at several test goals. And part of that was determine, what staffing is required to meet that goal. And historically, Wake had not systematically tracked data such as, what is the average portfolio size? What is the average number of, visits their gift officers were making, the solicitation and the closure rates? So we worked together to determine, based on their, historical campaign success and a number of other factors, to determine, okay, moving forward, if they wanted to achieve X goal, how many closures they would need, and therefore how many staff and closures per staff were necessary. And so, we backed up into, sort of the optimal mix of the prospect portfolio size, the solicitation numbers, the visits, the meeting, and part of the recommendation was, okay, to meet that goal, we need to, this information needed to be tracked and then, along the way, recalibrated if necessary as they were looking at the number of donors in their prospect pool. So, and that's where Jen's work and her team comes in, and how they were measuring this information to date, because you're about a year in, right, Jen?
We are. We have just finished the first year of tracking this against the capacity analysis that was provided by Martin Lundy. Part of the reason we wanted to do this is, in order to have a larger goal, we also have a higher level of accountability and scrutiny of the resources we've been given to achieve that goal. So if we set out with some very specific things of measuring and how we were going to track against those throughout the campaign, we could have a standardized reporting and be very transparent about the activity and our progress towards that activity for the campaign. So for us, we've started out saying very core thing that we're going to measure are our face-to-face visits. It's extremely important for us to make sure that we are in front of that donor and talking about Wake Forest. We're going to track the proposals that are out there and how many asks a development officer has with that ask amount, and then ultimately the yields that we get from those proposals. So very simple things, but extremely clear at the same time.
So Jen, and how do you then use the metrics? So you've worked with Martz, created these metrics. They're in the system. Data's being stored, and now you can produce this information. How does the team use it? Who uses it? What does that look like?
Right now, it is being used, because we're in the quiet phase, it's mainly being used by senior leadership and fundraising leadership. We have a person that we've positioned in the Associate Vice President for Development's office who really uses Advisor to answer these questions. And then also our prospect management team is heavily implicated in this as well. Because we're in that quiet phase, we're in the midst of using this as our portfolio review conversations that we have on a regular basis, which is designed to, it's prospect management, it's the fundraiser manager, and it's the fundraiser to really say, all right, how are we doing with this portfolio? And so for us, we measure against what did we say we were going to do with that portfolio? Do we have the right number of people in the portfolio? Has the activity occurred with those individuals? How many proposals do we have? And what does that proposal look like as far as the ask amount compared to what we thought we might be able to get? So the expected amount from that prospect.
And so is this something where, at this point, a manager will sit with a team and review this as a group, or is it done kind of more offline? What's the actual involvement of the team look like at this point?
It's actually a team, and they sit down as a group. There are some fundraising managers who do actually do it on a one-on-one basis, but right now it's more in a group environment.
And I assume out of that, in addition to getting the balancing, you're also learning things about best practices that can be called out and shared. What would some of those look like?
One of the best things that we've had that has come out of this is actually the strategy conversations, because when you start to look at it, you see someone who has a proposal that may not be the ask amount that we thought it should be. And the fundraiser will start to say, well, I kind of ran into this scenario, or this is what happened. And the people sitting around the table say, what if we tried this? Or let's connect that prospect with this donor because it will help set their sights higher. And so that dialogue has been critical for moving prospects forward, that if we didn't have the information sitting at our fingertips, we wouldn't know to start that specific conversation.
Yeah, that's actually, Jen, one of the points with our other clients that keeps coming up is it's changed the conversation from, the field officers come in, they're pretty verbal. They know the stories they want to tell, which may not be the ones that ought to be told. So this helps you get to an agenda about the right things to talk about and drill in on the highest priorities versus what's sort of expedient to talk about that particular review. It sounds like one of the points you're making too.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah, that's one of the things data does. It draws the focus to reality versus things that may not be as important.
Well, the key buzzword out there is data-driven strategy, and if you don't have the data to start the conversation, then you're just making a strategy that's not fully informed.
Right. So should we take a look at this and do a little maybe role play on how you would use this?
That sounds great.
So let me drop out of the PowerPoint, and I'm going to bring up, this is an advisor project that's similar to what you have, but it's disguised demo data, so it's not your data at all. We'll tell the group that. And if the names are all fake, so don't find some large donors out there and try to go after them because the names have been changed. But this is an example of a dashboard. It's got half a dozen 8 pages. We're looking at an activities report page, which, just to give some sense of what we're looking at, it's a group of 25 staff. There's 9,795 assigned prospects. There's 1,209 proposals out to the group. Those proposals total $440 million in change, and there's an expected value calculated off the ratings of $400 million in change for those set of proposals, for the pool of assigned prospects for those development officers. And there's a set of stats over here about numbers of prospects by staff, and so it shows the staff breakout. Prospects by rating, from the 50 million is the highest, the 1 rated, down to the 9, and then there's some unrateds in here. Then we've got the next charts talk about visits, and LTM means last 12 months, so there have been 1,192 visits to this group of prospects in the last 12 months, and here they are by staff. Here they are by rating, by purpose, and then by prospects. So, Cortez Winds has been visited 17 times, and at the bottom of the list you've got, single visits, and then there's some stats you can cut the data different ways. So that's sort of a starting point of an example of, grabbing the data that's in the system and putting it in a report format. Now you'll see in a minute, this is like a large pivot table, so you can select on it by just clicking on what you see on the screen, and it and all the other pages over here, which some of these are more graphical, will change. So I want to pass it back to you, Jen, and let's do a little role play back on how you might use something like this.
One of the first ways we use it is actually to look at a group of prospects within the campaign pyramid. So if we look at the prospects by rating, it allows us to focus in on, let's look at our very top prospects. So in this case, let's look at everyone that is a prospect at $5 million or above.
That would be, looks like the 0, 1, 2, 3 ratings. So in Advisor, what you would do to select them is take the mouse and slice over them with the mouse. There's 593 prospects who are rated 50 million or more, 10 to 50 million, 5 to 10 million. This is the group of prospects that are rated for 5 million or more. And you can see the other charts, this chart, and the visits, everything else changed to show that subgroup.
And so in this case, I just want to look at these. I don't want to look at anybody else. So I'm going to limit it to
So let's clear everything out.
Clear everything out. So I'm just looking at those 593. The great thing about this is you could look at the top end of your pyramid. You could look at the middle. That's one of the conversations that's always going out there. We're missing that middle end. The bottom end gets covered by direct marketing. The top end gets covered by high touch. We're missing the middle. But in this case, we're going to look at the top end. And at a quick glance, you can zero in on the activity with this selected group. You see the number of prospects. You can see who is assigned to them. And so in this case, it looks like all of them are assigned. But John Brown has 111 $5 million or more prospects. We have to start to wonder, can he handle the high-touch quality that needs to go on with those prospects if he has over 100 of them? You can also see how many visits have occurred in the last 12 months. And so if you look at that, there's only been 273 visits on 593 prospects. So it looks like maybe we're not penetrating this part of the portfolio as much as we need to.
I also point out over here, I mean, if you look at it by prospect, it looks like we've hit some of the people really well. Cortez Wins is in that group and has been visited, 17 times, and Floyd Agrawal 16 times, which may be a bit excessive.
Could be, maybe not, but it starts the conversation. You can also, if you click on the proposal pool tab, you can see who has an outstanding proposal in this.
Yes, so this is just a bit of a description. Here's a list of everybody, the primary staff name, this is the prospect name, and this is the proposals, size from 25 million down. Some of them don't have proposals right now. You see the stats up here. This thing on the left is called a heat map. It's looking at, for those top prospects, by group, leadership giving, VP of Development, Law is this area, and Mayor program is here. And then within the leadership giving, each of these boxes is a person. So this top left is Nancy Berrios. The size is how much her ask amount is. So Nancy's got the biggest ask out to this group, roughly $50 million. And we're using a coloring of the total ask to the expected value. So a 3 coverage ratio would be dark green, which would be good. Red would be a low coverage ratio. So you can quickly get a snapshot that of that group of officers, in leadership giving, you've got some people doing really well. John Brown, who had a lot of them, has a fair amount on the street, but he's red-orange, which means his coverage ratio is 0.63. To expect him to have more asks out than he does. So you start getting visual cues here about the portfolio in the heat map, which goes with the list over here.
And Doug, just a point about the expected ask amount, and I know this is just a demo, but some of you may be asking, how do you get to that value? And what we did in our work with Wake is we looked at, what was the capacity of the prospect versus what was their attachment and affinity to the organization to come up with an expected yield for each of those prospects. So that when Jen and her team were implementing that piece of the capacity analysis, they could look at, who was assigned to that person, and you can look at it through Advisor, who was assigned, what was their capacity, is there an ask amount out, and track that behavior through time, over the course of the campaign.
And one of the things that we did at Wake to operationalize that, because we had a very static capacity analysis that had been done, we've actually built that calculation into our Advisor project so that on a nightly basis, when it refreshes, if someone's capacity has changed, it will actually change their expected amount. If someone's attachment to us or affinity has changed, and we measure attachment and affinity as relative to how they've demonstrated their giving historically. If that changes, it will actually change their expected amount.
Yeah, and you can sort of see, looking at, as a pool basis, these satellite programs, the law and the mayor program, are smaller and redder, means they're not getting the same coverage of these top-rated prospects as the leadership giving and the VP of development team. And so there's something structurally different with how these programs are handling comparable level prospects. Probably be worth some maybe discussion, intervention. Maybe they're using different processes or whatever. Some of the implications that would come out of something like this.
And all of theirs are skewed down towards the orange and the red, which means they're pretty clearly off of the expected amount versus the ask amount.
So Jen, what else, you're going to look at a couple of other things in this role play. What else should we look at here?
I would say the other thing that we get is how to measure against those annual projections that Tina talked a little bit about. So if you go back and clear everything out and restore it all, we have those projections that are designed if you need to accomplish X number of gifts over the course of the campaign, then you need to have X number of visits or X number of proposals. We've broken those out by year so that we can see if we're on track to get towards the ultimate goal at the end, whether it's that you need to have 500 visits by the end of the campaign or 15,000, whatever your number is. How do you make sure that every year you're moving towards that? So we've broken it down on an annual basis. And so if you go, Doug, to the Contacts tab, if you zero in, this has some older data in it, but if you actually zero in on the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter of 2010, you could imagine that this could be any given year. It allows you to see for that year if our goal was to do 4,000 visits or 4,000 contacts. If you look down in the summary stats, we've only accomplished 2,500, a little over 2,500. So are we on track to do that? Maybe we need to make a course correction in the middle of the year. It might be that that visit goal was unrealistic based on the staffing that we have. It could be that perhaps our staff aren't out there doing the visits that they should be doing. The data isn't going to answer that question, but it's going to start the conversation, which is really important to understand. If you look at the number of proposals, so if you go to the Moves tab.
Yeah, so this chart is, just to clarify, it's all of the proposals aged from just on the street to 39 months and then different stages. And each circle, if I mouse over it, this circle would be a proposal. It's to Murray Galassi. John Brown has it. There's no title. It's a $5 million proposal, and it's been out 34 months, and we're colored by the staff here. So that's what this chart is showing, and there's some stats about them over here that back up the chart.
So at a glance, you can see how many proposals that you have out there. There's 298. How many prospects are selected, how many staff are involved. It allows us to see if we look at the total ask amount to the current year expected amount. We're not quite at that 3-to-1 ratio that we thought we wanted to be at, so we need to start talking about where we're doing with that. But it allows you to quickly zero in, and you can see that we have proposals that are pending closure, but they're aged at 38 months. So Doug, if you want to kind of see that one.
Yeah, sort of circle
a couple of them. Unfortunately,
yeah,
there's a couple. It allows us to start to have the conversation. Is that proposal that's pending closure but sitting out there at 3 years, do we need to think about a new strategy and close out that proposal and go back to the donor and work through the cultivation cycle again? Is it just that it is taking that long to finalize the paperwork because it's that complex of a gift? It's a $5 million gift, so it could be highly complex. But it just allows us to have the conversation.
Yeah, and at this point, you also probably see some bad data because there's 3 proposals that don't have an ask assigned to them. One does, so there's probably some data cleanup this would make as well, which is one of the sort of the side benefits of something like this.
It is actually a big side benefit because you start looking at it and you go, wait a minute, that shouldn't look that way, or we need to close that proposal out. But the way it visually represents to a fundraiser when they're looking at it, it's very easy to see, oh, no, I really did close that one out. Did I forget to tell you to close that out in the system?
Right. And just to take this another step, we can click this one proposal, and then we can go down, just get rid of everything else, drop all the data out. And sort of here's some details on the prospect ratings, affinity, capacity, parent, male, Norwalk, Connecticut. We have the giving history for this prospect, so we're asking $5 million in 2009. So this is the giving by that person over time. He's given $81,000. Did get a pickup in 2009, $51,000 gift after a sequence of pretty small gifts. So could this be $5 million? Well, it's been out there an awful long time. There is a pickup, and if I go to the contacts page now, I've got all of the contacts for this one prospect. So I drill down, from a pool to an outlier to a particular prospect, and I'm looking at, there were in Q1 of 10, 4 contacts, 2 in Q2. Kind of here they are with some of the descriptions: an off-campus visit, correspondence, phone. I don't see, looking at this, the momentum to get this prospect up to $5 million, which is sort of probably the full run of the discussion here. So again, we can back this back to where we were. We selected one prospect out here out of a whole pool, and then drilled to the specific detail, which is at some point you need to get to that level to understand what's actually going on and so forth. Any more on this? I think we covered this pretty well.
I think we did. We covered that, and we talked a little bit about the expected amount. And one of the things that you'll see when you're highlighting just that one, you can see that the ask amount was $5 million, but the current year expected value from that donor was actually only $320. It was $3.3 million. So there, your ask to expected ratio is 1.5. So it is a little bit closer to what we were looking for.
Yeah, because it's a 1 rated and unknown affinity. So this is what would combine to cause that calculation. Yeah. So there's some things in here that look good, but you don't see the energy and the momentum. And this has been out a really long time to get this over the line. Would be the coaching discussion. Let's go back to the storyline, and we'll finish up here in a minute and be ready for questions. So just in terms of, and this will start the question section, what we see, the benefits coming out of this as we look across a pool of clients is higher average ask amounts based on clear understanding of the expected value of the pool of prospects. So we're seeing higher asks. We're seeing shorter proposal cycles because we're understanding where bottlenecks are coming and we're helping people to get through them. The close rates go up. Better revenue forecast because you have a better certainty of what's actually in the data and what's in the pool coming. Clear-cut paths to individual performance goals. So the data's in the system. It's being tracked. It's being used. People are putting it in because it is being used. It's giving you a much better feedback loop at the individual level. Improved communication with the team as well as between the team and upper management. And even that heat map has been really invaluable. We have seen VP-level staff using that with the president, with boards, with the team under them, because it just communicates. In that case where we saw the law and the mayor program were small and red, there's something structurally going on there from a process perspective that needs to be looked at, and that's an organizational issue that is much easier to communicate visually than with numbers in tabular form. And improved performance in both the central and the satellite development offices. In that case, you would want to do something to pick up the performance of the law and the mayor program to get them up to the level of the other programs. So I'm going to, Jen and Tina, jump in and kind of add to this, and then we're going to pull in some questions here.
Yeah, Doug, I just to echo what you're saying is that because historically we've seen very little tracking of these types of metrics, and our advice is always keep it easy, and in our work with Wake Forest, we said look at 3 or 4 key metrics to determine how people are how your staff are doing, and meeting those yearly goals to get to that ultimate closure rate. And I think that kind of eases a gift officer. And I think the other thing that I would stress is it's a refined it's a thing that you work together on with your development officers, and it's a process that you are constantly refining, recalibrating, as Jen has mentioned, they are constantly updating their capacity information, their affinity, to look at those ratios so that she can, real time be aware of how they're doing in terms of their yearly goals. And as they're looking to go public in the next few years, I think that helps an organization determine, okay, how close are we to making that, that public announcement of that campaign goal.
And then are we on track to meet or hopefully exceed that initial capacity that we put out there for a campaign goal?
Yeah, and this, as you, just that discussion right there, this is clearly a process that involves getting data into the system, getting a team on board, getting tools that help, like you've seen here, be able to work through it, slice and dice, explore outliers, changing process, changing behavior. So this is not something, and actually the first question is, how long does it take to implement something like this? And I'll stop in a second here, but I think Jen indicated that it's actually a process that continues. It's not like, here it is, it's done. This is something that, here it is, okay, we're not getting contacts entered in the system, or we're getting a bunch of $0 proposals in the system. We need to fix the data entry, and we need to go back to the team and reinforce the value of it in the sort of the mantra. If it's not in the system, it didn't happen, and we're going to pay attention to this. So it's a process, and Jen, you might talk about it, Wake, how long it took to get from kind of start to where you are now, and then kind of what like the next year or two would look like.
Well, we're probably not your average implementation client, because while we understood the value of it, unfortunately we got a little distracted, so we let the project sit for a while, which is not ideal. So there I am airing a little bit of our dirty laundry right there. But it's one of those that you start out and you have some specs. We worked really closely with Doug, and actually Doug came on site at one point and visited with our vice president and our associate vice president of development, and had one of the best conversations that we've had to talk about strategy, because they were looking at data that they just simply would never have asked for a report or a query that had all of those pieces in it. But when it was presented to them, they said, oh, can we look at this? Can we look at that? And it prompted great conversation. And then when we had the project returned to us, then I had someone on our reporting team actually go in and refine it even more based on how we changed our business process during that time frame. So it can take as long as you need it to implement, or it could be as short as you want it to. You could bring this up and have it up in a couple of weeks, but you need to anticipate that, especially when you're talking about fundraiser performance, it is a very iterative process, and you need to make sure that you take in the time to refine it as you go along. We got some feedback last week from a demo group that had been looking at it and have turned it around and been able to implement some of those. I used it in a portfolio review just last week and got a few other key pieces of information that someone said, would it be possible to be able to look at the data and have a chart that showed X, Y, and Z? And we said, sure. And now we're going to turn around and add that to the project. So it is very iterative, and we envision that this will continue to grow and refine as we get closer to the moment that we go public.
And Jen, there's actually a follow-on question. Please list the individuals and the prospect meetings or teams. You talk generally about how it's used, but could you go like a level down into maybe some of the titles or more description of what types of people are actually using this and doing this kind of work?
We have our associate vice president. He's more of a consumer in the meeting. He's not actually driving in the advisor project, but we're showing the data up on screen so that he can start talking and having strategy conversations. We have our prospect management team there that is actually doing most of the driving, as Doug was doing, going in, clicking around in the project and saying, let's look at it from this perspective. We have the fundraiser and then their manager, whoever that might be. And those are the typical people in the conversation, unless it's a campaign conversation, which might involve the associate vice president for development, the vice president, and some other key senior leadership.
Good. Another question is, what database systems is Advisor compatible with? Do we work with colleague advancement? Yes, the answer is we're a software. What you saw is a software that pulls from the database. We actually load from the underlying database, Oracle or SQL Server or Sybase or whatever it is. And we have implemented Banner, SunGuard Banner, SunGuard Advance, Millennium, DataTel, Razor's Edge, Agilon on Salesforce.com. So the actual source system creating the information doesn't matter that much, and conceptually they're all pretty much the same. So yeah, we are pretty flexible, and we generally, as we do at Wake Forest, load nightly. So we'll pull from the database at night, and then the team would have the kind of capability you saw, which I was running in a client that can also run in a web version in a browser. Tina, how about for you? Here's a question. For prospect management, how is this practice used for proactive research? So I think the question is more than like looking at the pool, looking forward, and maybe proactive research would be like setting up for a campaign or that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, and basically what a suggestion would be is to look at first, the pool of those who are the assigned versus not assigned, as well as those who are falling in those higher capacity levels that you don't know much about, and assigning a team to those individuals. Maybe they've given, a certain amount over a period of time, but not recently. And going back to the dashboard, Doug, that you guys have created is sort of looking at, okay, those are all assigned people, but what about the unassigned people? When was their last activity? And, what was their giving history? And then moving from there to determine and further qualify that person so that you can put them into the prospect pool, because all of the model and the assumptions are that that pool is constantly being refreshed, is that as you're moving people through the process that you are now you've got new people coming in, and in the case of Wake Forest you have new parents coming in this year at the beginning of the school year, so that becomes part of the refreshing of the prospect pool throughout the campaign.
Yeah, we do a lot of work in prospect identification, which would be the same basic data, but the screens or the pages would be less about the proposal pool and the staff and more about the prospects and the people. And actually, just to build on that expected value, we've got a couple of clients who have used that for campaign targeting. So if the expected value is set at the prospect level based on the rating and affinity score. And for example, if you're trying to raise money for a new football program or stadium, you could tag all the people that played football, have expressed an affinity with football, been to alumni clubs or whatever, or been to games, and so you can now grab that group, and the expected value would total for it. And it makes a big difference if that totals, $5 million or $100 million. And the same thing with, some neuroscience building. You can grab the people with degrees or work experience in that field. So that's sort of repurposing the front pages for it. We would call it a different project, but it's these same underlying data and these same calculations are really useful for that as well. Here's another question. How does Advisor improve close rates? Jen, why don't you talk about that?
From our perspective, really just allowing us to have better strategy conversations and clearer accountability is helping us focus on the right prospects, so therefore closing at a higher rate.
Yeah, and I think
not magic. It doesn't do the ask, and it doesn't make the donor say yes. But it does provide the conversation that is helping focus the fundraising staff.
Yeah, and across our clients, we would use the word, it's a coaching tool. So it sets the discussion around the issues that are most important, and it has data that can be used to coach and help people understand, like, this is in this period for 39 months because, and maybe that ought to come out, and there's some other things that if you put focus on could be moved through. So it's that coaching discussion generator is how the close rates come up. I don't know, Tina, you have any perspective on that to add?
No, I mean, I think that's right on, you know, and it goes back to the overall key theme is, you know, using this data to strengthen your fundraising outcomes and, you know, diving deeper into figuring out, okay, you know, who are those outliers and why, you know, why has it been 38 months? And then, you know, if you're at a point where that, you know, that person's portfolio is, you know, down at like 100 and you need to add more people to it, then it kind of tees that up so that you're not, that person's not at a point where they're not operating at maximum efficiency. So it's kind of twofold. It's not only, you know, moving people through, it's also adding more people to the portfolio when the time is right so that they can continually be productive and help, you know, get to that expected close amount for the year.
Another question is, what, if any, deficiencies in your database did this project help identify? And let me take a shot at it, and then Jen, I'll ask you if there's anything specific at Wake to add. We had a couple of examples. One client, we set this up, and we put the bar chart up of contacts by quarter, and they were all coming in on June 30th and December 31st. So the team had goals to, you know, put contacts in. They were coming in with like really generic comments. So that was a data deficiency. Stuff was in the system, but it became very clear that there needed to be a more, we had to then manage time to get the contact report in, to get the team to get them in quickly with content versus what was happening. We had the same school actually had a similar thing happening with proposals. They were timed June 30th and December 31st, and most of them were $2,500, like a de minimis amount. So they were going in the system, but they weren't going in a quality way. And that's when you see that, you can go back and then you have to create another measure, which is time to get the proposal in, and somebody's got to just watch that and make it visible to the team. And at first people bucked, you know, why are we putting this stuff in the system? But when they saw it was being used, and when they saw it, they then became the outlier. You know, what would happen is the time to get the contact report would speed up, and a whole bunch of people then started getting them in 3, 5, 2 days. And then you had these outliers, and when that came up in meetings, and you have this principle, if it's not in the system, it didn't happen, the overall behavior of those outliers starts changing because people don't want to be like the far right side of the bar chart or the one that's way over the red line. We had another one, and this is where we looked at it in the best development officer was doing like 22 in-person visits in a year. And it just obviously wasn't right. And what was happening was the process to get the contacts in involved literally printing off a PDF, carrying PDF papers of a contact report, filling it out at the hotel room by hand at night, faxing it to the office, and somebody typed it into the system. And that's just such a cumbersome process that it's hard to fault the development offices for not doing it. And that can be changed. There's technologies today where you can get these things on the handheld devices. You can finish a meeting, walk down the street with a smartphone, and with touchdown and pull down tabs, get these things into the system right away. So there's combinations of things that we've seen here where the data just isn't there, but it flags an issue that needs to happen before you can use this to work on coverage and close ratios and all the things we're talking about here. And that will elongate the process, but it's then becomes step one. Jen, anything you want to add to that?
We actually found that we had a challenge in our process for proposals. We were only putting them in once the proposal was actually delivered. So we don't have a good view into our pipeline. So that's a process that we're working on redesigning so that way we can actually have a view into the pipeline and see proposals that are in development before they actually get to the point where they're delivered to the prospect. And then also we highlighted a challenge that we had once a proposal has been delivered and they put it in the system, the development officer would get the commitment back from the donor, whether it was a gift or a signed pledge form, and they would turn it into our gift entry and assume that that closed the proposal. And that's rightly so to the fundraiser. They're done. They've moved on. That proposal is successfully fulfilled, but the data in the system for that proposal didn't reflect it. So we're building a better process around how gift entry lets prospect management know, or how do we get some reports that will help identify those so that we can go to the fundraiser and say, congratulations, it looks like this proposal was successfully closed. I'm so glad that you received that $250,000 commitment.
Yeah, great points. And just as you were talking, a couple of other things triggered on the prospect staging. We've had a couple of cases where there were something like 14 or 15 prospect stages, so it's like stage 8, stage 9, stage 10. That's way too many. It's impossible to determine whether a prospect is in stage 8 or 9 or 10. On the other hand, we've had one client where there were 2 stages, open and closed. That's not particularly helpful either to look at moves. So ideally, the staging should be around 5. That's sort of, if you look across industry at sales stages, there's generally 4, 5, maybe 6 stages. So that's another thing. We've seen a number of examples where getting the right number of prospect stages is actually pretty important to getting something that's manageable and you can see moves in. I don't know, Tina, any other you'd want to add to this point?
Yeah, and just we are also seeing an increased level of sophistication in the moves management process, and really being deliberate about what that means, from moving from one stage to another prospect stage, and documenting that change in donor perspective has become key. But to your point, I mean, not making it overcomplicated at all, but to be very deliberate about documenting. Okay, what does that mean when you go from, a visit to a solicitation, and the various stages, of the ask is very important to outline what that means, so that when your gift officer is entering that information, that it's, for the most part, everyone's kind of saying the same thing or putting in the same meaningful documentation.
Yeah, we actually, there's one client, a higher ed university out there that's gone so far that you enter the contact reports on a smartphone and it's pull down, so there's different kinds of contacts they could be. You can then you can type in your own level of a contact if you want to. But then the system figures out by the type of the contact, the staging, and will adjust the stage based on the nature of the contact. So that's actually really cool, where it's not, they've really tried to define the stages and define the contacts and link them together, so it's an automated process that can obviously be overridden, but it really helps to get a lot more accuracy about, is it stage 3 or stage 4. Watching time. Yeah, we're, okay, I'm going to, any more questions? We'll be doing a follow-up on this webinar once we get it posted and recorded, so you'll be able to look at it and you can continue the discussion with us or through the chat rooms, which are listed right here. I want to thank Tina and Jen for their time on this. Really appreciate your advice and best practices and wisdom about this area, which is, as we said at the beginning, it's evolving in fundraising. It's, a lot of the principles are coming from consultative large sales and industry, where there's much more of a proven process, and I think they'll have huge impact here as they become applied. And we've got a couple of the leaders on this webinar today who've done a great job of describing conceptually what this is about, and then down into some of the detail on how it's being used. So thank you, Tina, and thank you, Jen. Appreciate it. And appreciate all your time, and we'll again be following up in about a week once we get the webinar up and recorded. Thank you, and appreciate your time.